Being able to do more with your Bitcoin, but still being close to those L1 networks is the key.
Whenever you look at asset transfers through the ecosystem and interoperability, you're only as secure as your weakest link.
Where are we at with the institutions? Where are we at with Bitcoin as an asset and the network? Welcome back to The Roll-Up, your home for technical talks and open conversations that shape the modular future. Nothing on today's show is to be construed as financial advice. You can see our full disclosures list at therollup.co/ventures. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode after a quick word from some of our awesome partners.
Redstone is DeFi's modular oracle, supporting over 100 clients on over 50 chains and offering 1,000 assets. Redstone is the leader for Bitcoin staking and yield-bearing assets. They offer the most robust, customizable price feeds available in any model. Join the Redstone exhibition today.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to The Roll-Up. Today's episode is around the infamous Bitcoin scaling subject, which has gone through its first cycle, in my view. We had a really interesting time last year, summer through fall, where we kind of had this rise of Bitcoin scaling solutions. We actually did a Bitcoin and Beyond program. Some of you guys watched that. Hemi was not a part of that, but they are scaling Bitcoin. And we have Jeff here today. We have Max as well. Guys, great to have you on. Welcome back.
Likewise, great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, sir. Well, Max, it's your first time. Jeff's been on once or twice before. Would love to get a quick intro about yourself, how you met Jeff, actually, because you look like a bright, maybe 25-year-old computer science guy, and Jeff is definitely more of an OG, and then kind of what your background is and what you do at Hemi.
Yeah, for sure. So got into crypto late 2011, early 2012. So I was still in high school and learned about Bitcoin. I always loved economics, computer science, and so that kind of merged the two together naturally. So got into it, started reading through the forums and the white paper and trying to understand what this technology is and what it could really do. And eventually started a project called CureCoin, which was basically trying to replace Bitcoin's proof of work with protein folding. And through doing that, I realized why it's so important to have proof of work that doesn't do anything useful outside of securing the system. And so I think a lot of people coming into Bitcoin at first, at least back in the day, they go, oh, Bitcoin's great, but we have this wasteful proof of work thing. We got to get rid of that. And so that was my own personal journey through coming to terms with how amazing proof of work is and why proof of work is, quote unquote, wasteful and Bitcoin's actually really valuable. So then my next project, I co-founded a company called Veriblock, where we were trying to secure blockchains with Bitcoin with a new consensus protocol we created called Proof of Proof. And that's actually where I met Jeff. And he was through his parent company, through the company he co-founded, Block. He was, I believe, the first investor. Block was the first investor in Veriblock. And so that's how we met way back in, I want to say late 16. It might have been early 17, but I'm going to go with 16. And just kind of, it's last 8 years have been, we were working on that company for quite a while. And then eventually it didn't really get to market. It didn't make sense. We were trying to secure like all these tail chains and all the old, Bitcoin forks, and there wasn't really a market for it by the time we had the tech ready. And so we took some of the tech from there and rolled that into what is now Hemi, and then added a bunch of other cool, new, innovative stuff we've created over the last 2 years. So that's the quick rundown.
Awesome. That 2017 era was particularly interesting, and that Robbie and I weren't around in 2015 or before, so we've kind of lost our. I've done a full circle where I was like Bitcoin oriented. I think Bitcoin's great. Left Bitcoin, did the ETH, did the trading, did the now it came back to be like, oh man, I just keep coming back to Bitcoin, and so I think institutions are coming back in a big way too now, which has been interesting to see. Digital Assets Summit last week was particularly telling, I think. It's a bit of a paradox there with the Bitcoins or Bitcoin and the institutions and kind of the ETFs. And Jeff, I think that we spoke about this last time, but honestly, Jeff, just before we get into Hemi and all of the intricacies, I'm curious from your perspective, what is the state of Bitcoin as an investable vehicle today? And I'll just kind of give my brief context. I feel like our career risk in the space for running this media company and fund has been almost neutralized in the last 3 months with the legislations, with the institutions wanting BTC. I don't see Bitcoin dipping more than 50% in a given downturn, except an extended bear market anytime soon. But of course, your perspective might be different. Where are we at with the institutions? Where are we at with Bitcoin as an asset and the network? And am I right to think that the career risk of working in crypto is more neutralized than ever, or is there more pain coming for those in crypto?
Well, I think Bitcoin is definitely a standout, and the past 3 months have advanced that thesis even more. The U.S. regulatory risk has gone way down for Bitcoin specifically versus the other cryptos. And not to get too deep into politics, but it applies crypto wide. The past U.S. administration, the Biden administration, was literally creating an anti-crypto army with Senator Elizabeth Warren and others. Just definitionally, it's on the label anti-crypto. And the new administration is very pro-crypto. So they've dropped a lot of lawsuits from the SEC against Coinbase and Ripple and others. Definitely going with far more crypto centric, crypto pro approach, which is very refreshing. For a long time, companies have been saying, okay, we want to work with the U.S. government. How do we register? How do we come in and work with you guys? And finally, they're creating a path to that. So that's good for crypto in general. And now to Bitcoin specifically, there was a little bit of amusing White House drama a week or two ago. They're building a strategic Bitcoin reserve. It started out as like XRP and SOL and a bunch of other tokens were announced, and Trump tweeted, "Oh, by the way, Bitcoin and Ethereum too." So that was kind of the rough draft stage. What came out of that was strategic Bitcoin reserve. It was Bitcoin and only Bitcoin. And then a week after that, they came out and said proof of work, the U.S. government said, is definitely not a security. So it created even more regulatory clarity, but only for proof of work related networks. So it was very much in this past 30 days, this is kind of breaking news as we record this, it was very pro Bitcoin specifically. And that's part of the Hemi thesis is we think people are coming back to Bitcoin. And so that's, selfishly, that's definitely music for our ears. I think, like I said, crypto itself is kind of in heading towards another alt season. If you want some of my trading and price predictions, I try not to do too much price talk, but it feels like the temperature for Bitcoin has been turned up quite a bit. Again, on the regulatory side, ETFs, fully legal, fully blessed. And as much as crypto is a global technology, Bitcoin's a global technology. I'm a U.S. citizen, and a lot of U.S. crypto people, they depend on how the regulatory winds ebb and flow. And so far, it's definitely flowing in the right direction, especially for Bitcoin.
Yeah, anything to add there, Max?
No, not really. It's I remember getting into crypto really in the early days, and Jeff even before that probably remembers all the regulatory uncertainty and the fear that just for mining Bitcoin the government's going to knock down your door and steal your hard drive. So it's remembering back to that now, saying strategic U.S. government crypto reserve or Bitcoin reserve now, all the clarity around proof of work. It's exciting, and I think a decade ago everyone would have said, "Yeah, you're crazy. The government's never going to hold Bitcoin and declare proof of work as this amazing technology, and it's not a security." So it's super cool to see.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's the big part on the legal side for the asset, and then for the networks, it just feels like there's a strong shift towards seeking networks with value, learning about how they work, trying to allocate time and energy. So one thing that I've kind of been battling with, last thing here on this kind of like socio-political spectrum, before we kind of get into more of Hemi and the tech and whatnot, is like part of the reason why I got into crypto was one is verifiability. It was like I saw this meme today from an OG guy, and he was like, Bitcoin's last audit was 10 minutes ago. The Federal Reserve's last audit was 51 years ago, or something like that, right? And so like that auditability, that verifiability to me was very, very appealing. And then that naturally kind of leads you down into more of like this libertarian arc, more of like this decentralize a lot of the things. And it does feel like a lot of, I put out a tweet, I was like, new BD in crypto is going to lobby your politicians and your institutions. So like, how does one wrap their mind around the core ethos of what we're trying to achieve here? Which ultimately, if done correctly, I think a lot of the OG Bitcoiners believe there's a lot of like replacements and like usurpations to be had. Now, I kind of have more of an optimistic approach towards this collaborative endgame. But like, how do we approach pandering to institutions and government for them to buy our bags, participate in our networks, learn about what is happening, versus this idea of why we're even here in the first place? And a lot of it is kind of to build up against or in as a evolution of the systems and processes that have been built by those who we are now welcoming into our world. Jeff, maybe you can take us here.
Yeah, I think it's fundamentally, crypto is about the technology is about censorship resistance. It's very self-sovereign. It's about personal empowerment, personal privacy. It's a global technology. It's not a U.S. technology, and I think all of that has remained unchanged. The crypto maximalist approach would say that institutions are inevitable, and so you got to figure out how to welcome the institutions, the governments, as well as the smaller companies, the individuals. How do we work together in this one world that we're all stuffed in, called planet Earth? And I think that once Bitcoin hits a certain level, which it has already hit, then you're going to be playing in the big leagues. So we're playing in the big leagues, and there are no nice and pretty answers of we're going to create a crypto for everybody but George Soros, right? It's crypto technology just kind of doesn't work for to single out everybody but George kind of nature. It's global. It's very level playing field type of technology, which is really why crypto appeals in part. I think it's pro freedom, and so I'm just ultimately happy that crypto is getting adopted by governments, because that naturally leans them to be more pro freedom, more about empowering their citizens. So from that perspective, I think it's a net win. On the institution side, I think they move very slowly. I was just at a large investment summit with at Michael Saylor's house down in Miami, and it was all institutions, hedge funds, large investors, and they're just now thinking about custody. And now that SAB 121 has been yanked, and SAB 122 is the preferred regulatory landscape, which is about putting crypto on your books as banks and banking, and the chutes and ladders that institutions depend on. Those chutes and ladders, in turn, have to be fully regulatory compliant and that sort of thing. So getting regulated custodians, excuse me, I got a bit of a summer cold here. Regulated custodians is, the baby step that institutions are taking to maybe onboard some crypto onto their balance sheet. There are others. There are new specialist types of hedge funds called liquid funds, which are newly investing in crypto, specifically the chutes and ladders of DeFi, like earning yield, things of that nature. And so they'll go one hop over to a liquid fund, and then the liquid fund will hop into crypto. And so there are a number of those like one hop removed touching crypto type investments that are another baby step that institutions are heading into. But ultimately, institutions are just like everyone else, they're welcome on open, permissionless networks. I'd say we just have to guard against, just like in the real world outside of crypto, institutional capture. Because you don't want, any government, any corporation, or set of control measures to capture Bitcoin or the other cryptos.
Yeah. And luckily, the networks were built in such a way that is Byzantine fault tolerant, and they've gotten to a substantial size. What I'm more, what I think is going to happen is more of like this funniest outcome is the most likely. Like there's 100% going to be nation states in this upcoming. Like I think institutions drive like the first part of this run here that's upcoming, I believe, for Bitcoin. But I think we're going to get nation states FOMOing at suboptimal times, and we are going to have nation state community members here, and it's going to be very, very like 2017. I remember on crypto Twitter, it was always like, "Oh, the institutions are coming. The institutions are coming." It's like, no, they're actually here now. It took 7 years. I think like the next legs for Bitcoin are going to be dominated by nation states, and we'll be saying countries are coming. So that's going to be an interesting time. But yeah, I was just curious on your opinion about kind of how to balance these different perspectives, because we found ourselves in a spot where like I'm moving to New York City. There's like this, there seems to be like this kind of like rush back to America. Robbie's trying to spend more time in DC. He's probably more akin to handle some of the politicians, and I just want to go interface with institutions in person and just educate them, because I feel like they're actually open to it. And I think that they want, like, for example, Blockworks did such a good job with Digital Asset Summit last week, to where like Yano and Mike are now kind of interfacing with a lot of these institutions. And I think that's what they need. Like they want unbiased, trusted research, education. And honestly, I think that a lot of these funds up there, they want a reason to buy. Like I think we have to do a better job of giving them a reason to buy and to invest. And so I think that's kind of what I'm trying to do next quarter or two in New York. I just feel like there's a large untapped market there. But again, like bringing the same principles in. And I think that's something that we have to keep in mind as an industry. Like even everyone in the industry is excited about stable coins right now. And I think it's awesome. It's great. But stable coins are just a representation of the previous system on chain. Like back in my day in 2020 on Ethereum, it was all about these algorithmic stable coins, trying to figure out ways to create store of value without having to have it be tied to a dollar. Right. So there's things that I think that we need to bring into the upcoming future with us. And it does feel like crypto's culture is going a bit more kind of wide reaching and obviously less cypherpunk. But I think it's just important to keep that.
Yeah, we
energy,
gotta keep that heritage alive, because folks, who are new to the industry, they might not necessarily have gotten the same, maybe this is a bad word, but onboarding that we did in 2010, 2011,
Correct.
2012 of the early crypto, cyber libertarian, crypto anarchist kind of ethos brought into
and I think open source
2025.
ethos too, actually. I think open source is the big thing that they will be able to get behind and understand. I don't think they can support like, no government or something, or like take down the Fed or whatever, right? And I don't think that we support that, but I think the open source ethos they ought to get behind.
Open source, open network.
Yep. Well, cool. All right, Max, let's talk a bit more about the tech, about Hemi, and kind of where we're going. Congrats on the mainnet, guys. Congrats on just everything going smoothly. I know how crazy that can be. Maybe we should start there with a reflection from you guys of the time spent to launching mainnet, how you're feeling about it. Did it go as expected? Did you guys lose a lot of sleep? And then what are you guys most focused on now as well?
You go first,
Yeah,
Max.
good question.
Go for it.
So we originally launched our public, we've been working on this for probably 2.5 years now, a solid 2 years, hands-on keyboard, IDE open kind of work. And so we did our test net back in July of last year, July of 24. And so we had a good, 7, 8, 9 months to bake the protocol, do testing. We had an amazing community show up who, whether they were chasing points or just really interested in parts of the tech or whatever, they were poking and prodding every single part of the system, which was really cool, really great from a testing, feedback, iterative development perspective. So that was super cool to see. I think that, kind of that baking period and figuring out, especially with some of the new stuff we're doing with Bitcoin interoperability, our tunneling system, what we call HVM, the Hemi virtual machine, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, later in this podcast. But seeing people try out those different technologies and put them to the test and give not just feedback of, hey, this part's broken, or, is this a bug, but, some of the usability stuff like, hey, if I'm going to build an application that does this, I'm going to need, this piece and this piece, and, this thing responding in this way doesn't make as much sense as maybe structuring it like this. So a lot of good feedback, both on the hard, bug fixes and improvements, and then also the softer, what the product looks like, how people want to use it, how people want to engage with it. So I think all that led up to a successful mainnet launch. We had just all that testing and feedback and work go into a final polished product that I'm really proud of getting out there and testing, in the real world with real money. So it's super exciting to see. The actual mainnet launch went as smooth as it can. I think whenever there's always the last minute, documentation updates and, is, this part still congruent with, the tokenomics change, whatever it is. But I think the team rallied together and figured all those out. And yeah, launch was smooth. The last, what's it been, 11, 12 days since we launched have been, it's cool to see the adoption. I think have some stats up here, a little over 100,000 unique addresses, which obviously doesn't mean unique humans on a keyboard, but it's a good proxy metric. A lot of transaction volume, a lot of people using the network, a lot of people interacting with the new Bitcoin tunnel system, a lot of people using the more traditional L2 Ethereum style tunnel system. And yeah, it's we got a lot of TVL on chain. We are starting to get that moved over to actually being useful liquidity in protocols like, DEXs, lending protocols. That's cool to see kind of that second phase of, okay, you got all the assets on the network. Now let's put them somewhere where they're productive and, can bring in users. So yeah, it's been overall very exciting. It's been your question on sleep. I think we're finally caught up on sleep again. A week and a half.
Max undersells it, undersells himself. He's been amazing. His whole team has been amazing. We tested to the point where we melted down Bitcoin testnet. We tested to the point where we melted down Ethereum testnet. The community even minted some free NFTs. I broke Sepolia NFTs in honor of the event. And testing is in this industry even more important than other industries. I've always talked about this as crypto as a lot like medical devices or aircraft software. It just can't fail. And you've got to stress test every line of code, every possible situation that you can think of. And I think that we did that in spades. So I'm really proud of our team and what they've done. And thanks to that, the mainnet launch went smoothly. As a mostly former software engineer, I still do coding every now and then, but lean very heavily on Mr. Max here. It's all about unit testing, fuzz testing, stress testing. There are literally 10 different types of testing, and we hit every single one of those. So it warms my software engineering heart that we had the opportunity to do all the testing that we need. Sometimes in startups and product launches, you just kind of have to shove things out the door the way that they are. And it's a real blessing to be able to be in a situation where you can wait to get it right and then push it out the door. And that's what we did with Hemi, and I'm super pleased with how it turned out. There was no drama on mainnet launch day. There were no explosions on mainnet launch day, and that's exactly what you want. Our engineers have a saying of never launch on a Friday, which makes sense because You don't want your poor engineering team staying over the weekend to fix broken stuff. We launched on a Wednesday, and things were just so smooth that I was making sure that the guys could go home and get sleep.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, it's quite stressful when you're launching so many different things at once. And then also the deployment of all the applications, explorers, all the infra, and then all the users, and then managing the community's expectations. So bravo, guys, and excited to see things grow and develop. I kind of have a thesis where it takes about 9 to 12 months, I think, for a chain to really even get to a point where traction is going to happen. Now, obviously, TVL and numbers are there, but really, like for the ecosystem to develop, I tend to kind of give it that much time. Within 9 to 12 months, you can pretty much tell, I think, like where this is going. And so that kind of becomes a question for you guys. And is I have a thesis that we see a lot more demand and development of like purpose built blockchains. So chains that are meant for a specific niche, for a specific community, or are technically crafted in a way to fulfill a specific use case. Hyperliquid's a good example, right? Like quite a centralized validator set, still kind of behind, still some like weird things happening there. But at the end of the day, they optimize strictly for performance and UX, and that's what they've delivered. Bitcoin is also like one of the OG purpose-built chains. Slow, it gets clogged up, it's expensive, but that's okay because there's so much mining power, there's so much at stake, and it's so simple with very little execution on the base layer that it's a perfect like payments / store value chain, right? It's like it may not be seen as that, but that's like one analogy that I've been developing, as well as something like Hyperliquid, kind of like two ends of the spectrum. Celestia, also very purpose built just for DA, other chains, right? And so when you guys are thinking about Hemi from your community or for your niche or for your specific use case, how is this technology that you've built under the hood, how is that purpose built for the use case that you guys are trying to achieve today?
I think
what does that actually look
it's
like?
the back to Bitcoin thesis. The world, I think, after many years of dallying with alt L1s and stuff like that, is coming back to Bitcoin. But you can't put all the coffees on the Bitcoin L1 main chain. So what is the what is the natural evolution after that? And similar with Ethereum, what do you do when you like some of the liquidity value protocols on Ethereum, but the fees are too high? Is economics tells you that inevitably things are going to spill over to other chains, and I think that's kind of the marrying the king and queen of crypto is Hemi's thesis, and I think we're leaning into that back to Bitcoin, back to Ethereum type of directionality. You're absolutely right with I think in your description of Bitcoin, and we embrace that. We think that Hemi is very complementary to that. So you lean into Bitcoin's strengths. It's absolutely bomb proof. It's the bell of the ball that you can say you can vote most likely to be here in 100 years. Bitcoin tops that list. But is it a little bit of a steam engine? Is it a little bit of an older technology? I think is also yes. And I think you lean into its strengths. You lean into where Bitcoin stops. We add a lot more programmability on top of Bitcoin to really lean into that on the technical side. But on the market, what are the killer apps? What are the killer apps that are coming? I think it's for us at Hemi at least a big portion, not the whole enchilada, but a big portion is BTC. What you can do with it yield wise, what you can do with it from mining pool payment flows going directly from mining pools straight into DeFi. I'm a micro Bitcoin miner. I can't brag about my exahashes, but I have several amp miners, and it sure would be nice to have that not just dropped into my passive BTC wallet, which is the way F2 pool and the other pools work now, but make that go further. Drop that into a Bitcoin lending market where I am yielding, 2, 3, 4% on my Bitcoin, or if I want more risk, dial it up and get into a Pendle PT or something of this nature that's a little bit more speculative. But I think that being able to do more with your Bitcoin, but still being close to those L1 networks is the key. Because beyond just, you were talking about Bitcoin's use cases, I would add to your very short list of, I think, too, settlement. Settlement. That's where all the roll-ups are settling to either Bitcoin or Ethereum L1. All of the DeFi protocols, the bridges, their home is the L1. And you kind of get into the fast lane of an L2 to do, a whole lot of your everyday stuff at very low fees. You'll go where the liquidity is, and then you'll kind of park back in the parking lot, settling to ETH or Bitcoin L1 at the end of the day. Max, do you have any similar thoughts?
I think that all makes sense. I kind of look at Hemi as sort of an infrastructure play. And so you're asking kind of like use cases and community. And I see what we're doing is, like Bitcoin was this base layer for amazing proof of work security, finality, very purpose built for handling transfers, being very simple, very unlikely to have some weird bug somebody discovers and exploits. Obviously, Ethereum's on the programmability side. Ethereum's now with their, L2 centric roll-up centric roadmap, looking at features they can add to the base layer, like DA with EIP 4844 and features like that. And I think Hemi, what we're really trying to do is bridge those two together, take the best parts of each of those and combine them into this cool new remix of Bitcoin proof of work plus Ethereum DA plus Ethereum programmability plus Bitcoin visibility, and combine those in a way that's interesting, unique, adds value to both of those networks, and acts as this infrastructure layer where if you want to build an application across either one of those networks or across both of those networks, this is the best place to do it because we're giving you the most bare metal access to Bitcoin, we're giving you the most bare metal access to Ethereum, and we're creating an ecosystem where you're not just limited to the Hemi chain, but in the future, you can take all those features and use those on your own L3 that's some sort of app chain for your DApp or dedicated chain for your community, and you can customize. I know the whole modularity narrative is way overplayed and no longer the meta, but being able to swap out, okay, I need, I can use proof of authority because it's gaming chain and people are moving around, NFTs worth 2 cents and I need really high throughput, but I still want access to Bitcoin and Ethereum assets. Okay, that's one architecture of L3 that you could launch on Hemi. Or I need something super secure. We need our own native Ethereum style proof of stake. But I also get Bitcoin security, and so maybe I can, experiment with other sorts of, finality mechanisms, and I can use a liveness preserving consensus protocol instead of a security optimized one that can never fork. And so you get all these different interesting geometries of what you can do now that you have access to Bitcoin, both security and assets, access to Ethereum, both DA and assets, and then how do you remix those in interesting ways that serve different use cases?
Yep. Yeah, I think regardless what Jeff was saying about kind of you can't fight gravity, we have to scale horizontally. That's like part of the Hemi thesis, and then the other part is really just bringing back to Bitcoin and giving people this optionality, Max, and providing a tool set for developers and then also for users to be able to kind of do what they want to do. So let's go a bit more under the hood then, Max. Talk to us about why don't we start with the bridge construction, because I think that that's a hot topic in the Bitcoin scaling space. Obviously, there's a lot of progress happening on BitVM. I think that's all the way up to like 2.5, depending on how you count it these days. And then, of course, a lot of teams working on trust minimized Bitcoin bridging between L1 and L2. So what was the construction that you guys chose, and how are you navigating the trade-offs of that construction?
Innovating finance, global, institutional, and on-chain. Deep liquidity to drive capital efficiency. Now, maximize yield on institutional-grade liquid staking with METH. Unlock $1 trillion of capital via FBitcoin. All of this so secured by Mantle's treasury of billions in stables and ETH capital pools. This entire ecosystem is coordinated by a vast network of seasoned VCs that are aiming to create the next generation of banking and financial technology. This is Mantle. Ladies, gentlemen, Anons, and Degens, it is stablecoin season, brought to you by your favorite, the best in stablecoins, Frax. USD dollar stablecoin backed by the best in the business, the Biddle Fund by BlackRock and Superstate. This is stablecoin season. It is the yield-bearing stablecoin by Frax, coming soon to a chain near you.
Yeah, great question. And I'll give kind of the 2-minute background on why Bitcoin settlement's so hard first, that kind of set the stage for our design, and then one of the future designs that we're working on that kind of combine some interesting ideas in the space. So right now, when you build an L2 on Ethereum, settlement's not easy, but it's a solved problem in that you have this Turing complete language. You can write any kind of arbitrary settlement logic you want. You know, you have programmability of assets. You're able to say, hey, all these ERC20s and ETH that got deposited to the L2, those are going to sit in this contract with, these flows for assets in and out. And when they come out, you have to have a, withdrawal receipt and the proof. And then you have this challenge period, or you have ZK proof, and all that can be done and programmed in Ethereum. And so it's not easy, but it's a solved problem. We know how to do it. We know how to do it very securely. On the Bitcoin side, Bitcoin's lack of programmability, the lack of flexibility, it makes you come up with really creative, sort of strange solutions, because on Bitcoin, it's an entirely different model. It's called the UTXO model. And so instead of having, this EVM where you have all this data available and the ability to arbitrarily do whatever you want based on that data and look at the data of another smart contract, Bitcoin's this really siloed thing in multiple ways. The first is with that UTXO model, Bitcoin does have smart contracts. Technically, you can write some very limited logic in what's called Bitcoin script, but you have no flow control, so you can't do a loop or jump or go to. You don't have any sort of access to what else is happening on Bitcoin. So on Ethereum, I can write an app that looks at a Uniswap pair and looks at the current price and liquidity and then does something based on that. Bitcoin, you can't even look at whether, say, another transaction is confirmed or whether an address exists or a UTXO has been spent. You have no context when you're executing a Bitcoin smart contract and spending a UTXO. You don't have any of that context, any of that awareness of what else is happening on Bitcoin. Where am I? The only thing you really have access to is like, what's the timestamp? What's the block? That's about it. And so you have to come up with these constructions that work around those limitations in interesting ways. And so the first version of our Bitcoin tunnel, we're using something called over-collateralized multisig. And so basically anyone can spin up a custodianship vault. They can post collateral and then be part of this collateralization system that uses one of the technologies we built called HVM, or the Hemi virtual machine, which is a way to basically introspect Bitcoin from inside an EVM, very dynamically, very gas efficiently, without any sort of oracle or relayer. So it's, you have a Bitcoin full node running in the EVM that's smart contracts. You can write smart contracts that can look at that and see, okay, here's what's happening on Bitcoin. This UTXO is not spent. This one was spent in this transaction. And then you can write systems that observe what's happening on Bitcoin in the context of, where should certain Bitcoin the protocol cares about be? And then if it sees it moves, okay, was that a valid withdrawal or not? Then it can go and, punish operators, take their collateral, use that to rebuy, Hemi BTC on the open market to make sure the system remains solvent. So that's the first model. And then the second model that we're working on is a BitVM based one, which will be extremely capital efficient, extremely secure with one event security, or basically this idea. It's kind of like spiritually, if you remember the old ZK networks where they had this setup ceremony and they said, as long as one person's honest, this whole system works fine. BitVM is very similar to that, where you can say, okay, we have 100 or 1,000 participants who all do this sort of setup ceremony in a way. And then as long as one of them destroys their private key or doesn't actively collaborate with all the other people in the tunnel, then those funds are secure and can only be withdrawn with, valid proof of, this person should be able to withdraw these funds on the BitVM side. Now there's with BitVM, there's, especially with the current BitVM 2 design, there's a limitation that's really hard to work around due to that lack of Bitcoin introspection I mentioned. So you're not able to, in a Bitcoin script, you're not able to say, hey, did that transaction get completed that did this other thing that should have been done in order for me to release these funds? And so at BitVM, you need this model where you have liquidity providers who front liquidity. And so you have a BitVM vault with 100 Bitcoin in it. If somebody wants to withdraw that 100 Bitcoin, you need a liquidity provider who's part of that BitVM vault construction to front the 100 Bitcoin, send it to the user, and then basically prove that they did that, prove they fronted the liquidity, to then reimburse themselves from the BitVM vault. And that's a limitation of the way that you need to set up all these different transaction graphs on Bitcoin ahead of time. You can't have, an arbitrary destination because we don't have covenants on Bitcoin. So you can't put Bitcoin in a vault and say, we don't know where it could possibly go, but we're going to limit it in all these creative ways. You know, okay, it could go to one of these 100 liquidity providers, and then they're going to front this liquidity, and then they'll be able to reimburse. And so the way that system is constructed with BitVM2, it has to use this really roundabout way of proving to itself that another action took place on Bitcoin, a la the liquidity provider fronted the liquidity. And the way they do that, it's with a thing called superblock light client emulation, which was borrowed from, if anyone remembers the old NEPA POW days of like 2014 with proofs of work. It borrows some ideas from that. But the problem is Bitcoin miners can go and ransom attack that system. And so there's this observation period where basically the person who fronted the liquidity waits, 2 weeks or a week or whatever. It's a security parameter of the protocol. And then they say, okay, here's the best super block that I saw, which means the Bitcoin block with the lowest hash, basically. That's very unlikely to occur. But statistically, if you have 1,000 blocks, 500 of them will be, half the target, and 250 will be a fourth. And so you use that kind of a system to say, okay, here's the best block I saw. It'd be really hard for somebody to fake that and attack the system. And then there's this challenge period where somebody could come in and say, hey, I saw a better super block, as in a lower hash, and basically eject that liquidity provider from the system and remove them from the ability to refund themselves with liquidity. So it's very secure from the perspective of it's very hard for an operator to attack that system and withdraw funds in an invalid way. But Bitcoin miners, when they mine a block, they could choose to withhold it from the network. And people mining on a pool, when they mine a share that mines a block, they could choose to withhold that share from the pool. And so you get the situation where people who are mining, whether it be individual miners or pools or wherever, at multiple levels of the stack, they could see, hey, I have this Bitcoin block that's a very plausible super block, and there's a bunch of BitVM vaults closing. I'm going to withhold this and then ransom attack the operators. And so you get this upper bound of, the BitVM2 standard construction can only secure, you can argue where exactly the line is, but, 3 or 6 or 10 Bitcoin, somewhere around the Bitcoin block reward, or maybe even a little bit lower in a vault without having the economics screwed up for those sorts of ransom attacks. So one of the cool things we're doing with Hemi is this external observer of Bitcoin consensus in a very censorship resistant way. So unless you were able to completely censor Ethereum and completely censor Hemi simultaneously, you can't prevent the Hemi protocol from getting up-to-date information about what Bitcoin consensus looks like from the entire world. Anyone can say, hey, I see these block headers. Hey, I see these block headers. And so this external observer Bitcoin consensus, you can reflect that now back to Bitcoin as part of the whole ZK proof that's validated as part of the BitVM construction to say, instead of the super block light client way of trying to sample Bitcoin and figure out what block is actually on the canonical chain and prove this and prove that, you can instead just say, hey, this external system that's extremely hard to censor, this is the view that it sees, the cumulative inputs from everyone in the world who's observing Bitcoin. This is what that system sees. Here's what it looks like. And we can trust that and validate Bitcoin activities against that. And so that small tweak makes it so you can build these really secure BitVM2 based, variant of BitVM2 vaults. And it also acts as a public good because Hemi is basically this censorship external observer Bitcoin consensus. It's not just that we can use that for settlement of our BitVM vaults, but anyone else could basically take those same proofs and say, hey, if we trust Hemi's security model for this anti-censorship thing, we can reuse those proofs in our protocol. We don't have to, go through Hemi or, connect to them in this way or that way. It's just, kind of like Bitcoin is a great uninfluenceable random number generator. So, if you and I want a fair bet, we could bet based on the last bit of the next Bitcoin block. Similarly, and you don't have to pay Bitcoin transaction fees to do that. You don't have to, no Bitcoin miners or anything like that. So too with Hemi, it's just emitting, or once we launch this, it will be emitting these proofs of Bitcoin consensus in this very censorship resistant way. So you can say, hey, let's take that, let's plug it into our BitVM system, make it more secure, benefit from that public good, and then everyone's using, depending on that adoption, but everyone will be using very similar vault designs. And so if they're swapping out Superblock light client emulation for these proofs, then you have this whole network of networks moving together with similar custodianship mechanisms that can also lead to improvements in interoperability and so on and so forth. So it was a very long, rambly answer, but that's the high-level Bitcoin tunnel. So first version, this over-collateralized thing. Second version, this BitVM, and then solving that Superblock light client emulation problem.
Awesome. Okay, so right now, a sort of trusted multi-sig setup where anybody can join and set up one of these vaults to participate in this tunnel. As BitVM progresses, you guys are able to adapt that technology. And then bringing back to HemiVM, running a full Bitcoin node, which for those in the audience, that basically means downloading the entire Bitcoin blockchain and updating it every single block within the HemiVM or the HVM, which is an EVM orientation. Currently running what I understand to be Hemi is running this single sequencer somewhere with there's certain there's plans to eventually do some potential co-location things or rotating the sequencer, I'm sure, getting to stage 1, stage 2, etc. But the trust assumption that we currently are set with is similar to any other single sequencer L2, which is effectively we need to trust that the sequencer isn't being malicious. If the sequencer is ordering the transactions in the first come first serve basis, which I assume is what it is, then everything's okay. Those blocks are then being posted to Ethereum, and are getting a look through the Bitcoin full node in HVM to also post that onto Bitcoin. And some kind of fill me in on the settlement. Is it like a multi-settlement process happening here, or are you just using the legitimacy of the Bitcoin node and the integrity of that to verify the data of the actions on the L2 in that given block, or where does the extent of the quote unquote settlement, which I kind of think is a meme, but where is the security derived from directly? Is it both of the Ethereum and Bitcoin? And then what does the kind of data availability process look like?
Yeah, good question. So I think probably walking through kind of the transaction life cycle might be helpful, and then we can dive into some of the nuances there. So basically, you send a transaction to Hemi's peer-to-peer network, it propagates, it's picked up by our single sequencer. We have plans to decentralize that with Ethereum-style proof of stake plus single slot finality. And one of the cool things is the way that we inherit Bitcoin security using something called proof of proof. It gives us Bitcoin finality after about 90 minutes, which means no matter who has what amount of consensus power on the Hemi network, once something reaches Bitcoin finality, you could not revert it unless you went and 51% attacked Bitcoin itself to retroactively write different data into the Bitcoin chain. And so that basically gives us the ability, when we do decentralize the sequencer, to do it with a consensus protocol that preserves liveness over safety. It's the classic trade-off. Everyone talks about having, instant finality. And the truth of it is, when you really boil it down, there's nuance here, of course, but they're basically saying it has instant finality because instead of forking, it will halt permanently. And so you can argue whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, and whether social recovery is better than having an automatic technical rework, whatever. I tend to think resilient systems that survive on their own without humans coming together and intervening in some giant network reset is more valuable. But so that's why Ethereum chose its consensus protocols, because it is liveness preserving. So Ethereum can fork, it can reorg, but in the the happy case, it gets finality after 15 minutes, or really 7 minutes, but say 15, and then you can add this best case single slot finality that doesn't threaten that. But anyway, so right now, single sequencer, and then the plan is to decentralize it with Ethereum style proof of stake, which we can do because of proof of proof inheriting Bitcoin security. And then sequencer puts it into a block, the block gets propagated. Anyone who's running a full node can see the block optimistically that's signed by the sequencer. and so they accept it as tentatively valid, but it's not guaranteed to be part of the chain until it does actually get published to Ethereum DA. Once the sequencer signs a block, they propagate it to the network. Everyone accepts it as a tentative block, basically, and assumes it's correct, but doesn't, it doesn't have finality yet because it still needs to get through Ethereum DA and through Bitcoin, publication to Bitcoin, basically. So that block, after a period of time, will get published to Ethereum DA. So right now, that's roughly 15 minutes between a block getting created and being published in a batch to Ethereum for DA and blobs. And then proof-of-proof miners will see that new block on the network or a nearby keystone. And I'll quickly cover the keystone piece. Basically, you don't want to publish a ton of unnecessary data to Bitcoin. And because Bitcoin has a block time of 10 minutes, there's no point in publishing 100 block headers and then them all getting recognized by Bitcoin at once, basically. So we have this keystone period set to 5 minutes. That's based on half the Bitcoin block time. Going much below that, you're paying a lot for publications and not getting the benefit. But every 5 minutes, there's a keystone block every 25 blocks. And then proof-of-proof miners take that Hemi block header and publish that to Bitcoin in a Bitcoin transaction. And then Hemi uses that for fork resolution. So if there is ever a fork, so if multiple competing versions of Hemi's chain that are internally consistent, they could be valid chains, they're not invalid state transitions. If those got published to Ethereum DA, then the fork resolution protocol uses those publications on Bitcoin to decide which chain's actually canonical. And the end result of that is you get a system where when it's operating normally, you get Bitcoin finality after 90 minutes, and everyone can see that that it would be impossible for the fork resolution algorithm to ever get off of this chain up to this point, because it would need other publications of an alternate chain published to Bitcoin blocks that have already been mined. So you'd have to revert those Bitcoin blocks basically to retroactively insert data to get fork resolution to say, okay, it's not this chain anymore, it's now this chain over here. And so you have this wave of Bitcoin finality that slowly chunks up the chain in Bitcoin 10-minute intervals. And after about 90 minutes, you get Bitcoin finality. Again, that it can't be reverted without attacking Bitcoin itself. Or if there is an attack ongoing, the attacker has to publish headers of their attack to Bitcoin, at which point it's publicly visible to everyone. So you either see there is no attack going on and the chain is secure up to this height unless there's a Bitcoin reorg, or there is somebody who's doing an attack on the chain. They're publishing these headers to Bitcoin in lockstep with the legitimate quote unquote publications. Everyone can see that and they know to wait until that situation resolves and one of the two forks gets chosen as finally being, true Bitcoin finality, and the whole network agreeing and reorging onto that one single agreed upon chain. So that's high level the security model from a consensus perspective. And then there's the settlement side, which is standard settlement on the Ethereum side using the optimistic stack, settling to Ethereum. And then on Bitcoin, it's that Bitcoin tunneling system we talked about. First with the over collateralized vaults, where if somebody misbehaves, HVM can observe that misbehavior by seeing, Bitcoin was moved to the wrong place or at the wrong time or in the wrong way, and take that person's collateral and use that to keep the system solvent. And then eventually that BitVM variant that we're working on.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. That paints a much better picture. I think it's basically fair to say that Hemi has the same trust assumptions when ordering transactions as any other single sequencer L2. However, effectively the settling and the lack of, or the reorg protection is significantly stronger in terms of when transactions are settled, due to kind of obtaining the security from Bitcoin itself as well as Ethereum. You'll get better finality guarantees here than on chains which just use Ethereum for finality, which is really helpful for interrupt, because effectively a lot of solvers or market makers, they take inventory risk when trying to do cross-chain transactions. Obviously, having something like single slot finality is ideal. Shout out to Cosmos SDK and Tendermint. That never kind of made it into Ethereum land and into L2s for a variety of reasons, namely because the L1 just has slow block times or long block times and slow settlement times. But basically what you guys will get is the property of you should be able to have better guarantees for your bridging in and out of Hemi due to this setup, which I think is good. one kind of two dynamics that I think you guys will kind of run into obstacles with is one, you guys are, if you're going to achieve what you want to achieve, I think one, you will push Ethereum's blob capacity relatively quickly. I think Pectra is coming very soon, though. I think like within 2 weeks. Today's the 24th of March. Don't know when this goes out, but that'll help. But I still think you guys may need more throughput. Something like EigenDA, Celestia, Avail could be interesting. And then the second one is some sort of community dilemma here, where like trying to figure out who like, I just think that there's a difference between Ethereum and Bitcoin communities, and trying to like kind of walk that line and be both will be interesting and fun. And then obviously just like scaling out the sequencer into a more censorship resistant kind of way. I think there'll be several L2s this year that launch at stage 1 or stage 2 even. And I think that'll put a lot of pressure on those who aren't to kind of get going on that. So those are some things that came to the top of my mind. So we talked about the consensus. We talked about the execution. We talked about the kind of overall posting of the data and of the security properties. I'm curious where you guys see Hemi fitting in terms of differentiation from the other roll-ups and chains in this space. I think we have quite a bit of chain fatigue, if you will. I think people are dying for more apps. So like, what do you guys believe is your differentiating, whether it be on the tech side, distribution, or community? And then as we kind of wrap, we'll talk more about kind of what's coming next.
I'm pretty heavily biased in terms of, I think we differentiate on all those factors.
Okay, and you have Jeff as your co-founder. That's also helpful.
The fundamentally, I look at all the other competition as comparables, and I see kind of two sorting hats. People silo into the I'm a Bitcoin L2 or silo into the I'm an Ethereum L2 camp. And I think it's non-productive to be so siloed. So I think we already are several chess moves ahead in terms of that. Many of the other Bitcoin L2s, they did not extend, they staple gunned an EVM onto a Bitcoin anchoring solution, but they didn't update the EVM to actually talk Bitcoin. As far as I'm aware, we're the only ones in the industry that's done that. We added Bitcoin opcodes to the EVM itself, so that me as a Bitcoin script developer, my ability to program just 10x or 100x, because now I can program Bitcoin L1 on Solidity, at the smart contract level, and so now I have all the loops and the function calls and state preservation that Bitcoin script itself natively doesn't have. And so even if I'm a Bitcoin maxi, I've just extended the ability to develop Bitcoin into a new dimension. So I think that's new, unique, comparable. Talking to both is new, unique, and comparable. The community is pretty amazing. I've been surprised by the metrics that we're seeing. I know everybody loves to count Telegram users and Discord users in absence of better metrics, and we do a little of that too. But one interesting facet, and one of the over 50 apps that are already on Hemi, is a project from our ecosystem called Demos, Demos. And what it actually does is it does proof of human. So it allows you to prevent Sybil attacks and kind of duplicate account type things, but in a way that doesn't collect KYC. So as far as I'm aware, that's the only solution that doesn't collect KYC. And that leads into the community having, as far as we can tell, over 80,000 unique users, unique humans that weren't botted or some other cloning technology. And so I've never seen a community that healthy, that strong, this early. So I feel really blessed on that side. And then, just the programmability of being able to, extend Bitcoin by literally having a Bitcoin node inside of the EVM is a new dimension of programmability on the Bitcoin main chain that we're bringing. So I think that gives us an edge. But ultimately, there's a lot of leaning into again we're getting a lot of pull. I shouldn't say leaning into. We're getting a lot of pull in the direction of Bitcoin mining pools, Bitcoin DeFi. That's where like liquidity providers are grabbing us by the necks and saying, we need this lending market or this, particular setup so that we can earn yield on your chain and kind of keep the, keep the Bitcoin close to home, such that we can exit directly to Bitcoin, directly to BTC L1 from your chain. We don't have to bounce anywhere else. So a lot of energy from those particular directions.
Add there, Max. Anything to add?
Yeah, I think that covers it. I'd say just on the application side, Jeff talked about the Bitcoin node embedded in the EVM and some of the new design patterns you can do around that as a developer. I think all of the Bitcoin L2s we've seen so far have only focused on one of two ways of programming Bitcoin, which is move the Bitcoin onto the L2, treat it as an ERC20, and then do a bunch of Ethereum things with it, which I think is great. And that's where most of the energy is going to be, this year, next year, or 5 years in the future. But there's this whole other model of leaving the assets natively on Bitcoin and setting up systems that incentivize people to do or interact on Bitcoin in certain ways that are in their economic best interest and avoid ever having the need to bridge or tunnel those assets over to an L2 and have this custodianship system involved. And so one of the things with HVM is, for the first time ever, you can build applications that observe all kinds of different changes to Bitcoin state, again, with no authority, no oracle, no relayer. It's just pure Bitcoin, unadulterated Bitcoin state, fully indexed, accessible in the EVM, and fully backwards compatible. Anything that works on Optimism or Ethereum, you can launch here and it runs fine. But if you want to use these new features, they're there and available to get this Bitcoin data. You can build applications where you leave the stuff natively on Bitcoin, so you can use that for native Bitcoin staking systems. So leave lock your Bitcoin in a certain way on the Bitcoin network. It's never tunneled over. You can observe it, and then you can let them be an AVS and secure system. You can do that for completely decentralized, non-custodial DEXs or lending protocols. There's even cool stuff like Bitcoin MEV marketplaces, being able to pay your Bitcoin transaction fee or like an accelerator fee in USDC or ETH or whatever from the Ethereum ecosystem or the Bitcoin ecosystem. And I think also we're doing all of that Bitcoin programmability, but in the context of also being fully connected to Ethereum. And so it's a 1-2 punch of, you can build better Bitcoin applications that either have, this new variant of BitVM, for example, or leverage that in an interesting way, or they're using, this tunneled over Bitcoin directly, or they're doing this cool thing with non-custodial movement of Bitcoin assets and observing that and collateralizing it appropriately. But you're doing all that in the context of all the assets, all the liquidity that Ethereum has that can natively come over and interact in those protocols. And you're doing it in a way where in the future, you could take Bitcoin and part of the reason we called it tunnels is it's not just going from Bitcoin and Ethereum to Hemi and then back to both networks respectively. You can go, in the future, you'll be able to go from one network through Hemi to the other network. So you can take Bitcoin, bring it through that, BitVM style custodianship system, take that, go through the high security L2 settlement style tunnel on the Ethereum side, and you've just moved Bitcoin in a very secure manner to the Ethereum ecosystem where you could go use it on Ethereum base layer, on Optimism, on Arbitrum, on ZK Sync, whatever. And whenever you look at asset transfers through the ecosystem and interoperability, you're only as secure as your weakest link. So if you move a token from Bitcoin to an L2, and that's super secure, but then to move from the L2 to Ethereum, you're going through some trusted 3 of 5 oracle system. Well, that's really your risk, right? Is that 3 of 5 system, not the native Bitcoin custodianship. And so being able to have this, I wouldn't say an audit trail, but this very secure every step of the way movement of Bitcoin to Hemi, to Ethereum, to the Ethereum ecosystem, that starts opening up a huge advantage for the Ethereum ecosystem, being able to have secure Bitcoin natively in its pipes that we know is backed by really solid settlement custodianship tech when you go and unwind that whole train back to Hemi and then finally back to Bitcoin.
Ultimately, that's what I think a lot of Bitcoiners or just people that hold Bitcoin want, is that level of security. I spoke to a lot of institutions in this space and teams that are working on similar products, and effectively what they want is the ability to borrow against their Bitcoin and to earn some small yield on it, but to have it be in a very, very safe place, very close to the Bitcoin main chain. They also want it to not be wrapped typically. I know you guys have a Hemi BTC product, but if it is wrapped, they want extremely verifiable proof of reserves on chain, typically on the Bitcoin main chain. So like many kind of risk considerations there that I'm glad to hear that you guys are thinking more deeply on. As we kind of come to a close, I mean, it wouldn't be a Hemi podcast pre-token without a when token question. So how does the distribution of the Hemi token look? Obviously, we are, you know, and from words from speaking with a lot of the marketing peeps on your team, very non-token oriented community, very loyal, real community here. But when it comes to adding additional security to the network, incentivizing developers and builders, as well as community, how are you guys thinking about the next stages after mainnet now? What's the most important for you guys on the community and growth and distribution side? And any kind of alpha or information that you may be privy to that you could share with our community?
Yeah, the disappointing answer is we don't give much detail about the token. Where there's definitely going to be a Hemi token. I guess I can let slip exclusively here. It's going to be an ERC20 on Ethereum L1 that's bridged to Hemi as our first step. So that's a little bit of a technical detail, not an economic detail. But we're focusing full force on talking to institutions, liquidity providers, big token issuers, and really bringing apps and assets onto the Hemi chain. And so whether that's incentivized with a token or incentivized through some other means, for example, you get partnership A and they're really interested to work with partner B, and you can bring them together on the Hemi chain in a business fashion, and one provides liquidity for the other, and it's a really win-win type situation. So apps and assets is growing those is where it's at, and a lot of that is obviously Bitcoin specific. So we're talking with a lot of Bitcoin whales, miners, capital providers, institutions to bring Hemi connectivity and assets to Hemi. With the token itself, again, we're going to be frustrating and not talk too much about those details. We have a bot on Discord that whenever anyone asks when TGE, it responds that it'll be sometime before GTA 6 is released by Rockstar Games.
All righty, guys. Well, thank you, Jeff, and excited for the future of Hemi. Max, appreciate you joining us for the first time. Looking forward to having you back in the future. Both of you guys, congratulations on Mainnet. Also, just congratulations for sticking through what people were calling a bear market the last 2 months. I don't know. We got to teach some of these newcomers what a real bear market is maybe one of these days.
That's
but
right.
Keep on pushing. That's right.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having us.
All righty, guys.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.